You know when you go past a car crash, you know you shouldn't look, right? But you do. Every year, Macro, Norman Goodfellows and others bring out catalogues of whiskey. And it is, if you are a fan of whiskey, a little bit like having to go through a 35,000 Rand a bottle for 40-year-old Glenfiddich, but that's cheap by some standards. Macro has advertised, and won't talk to us because I described in a newspaper article that I thought it was vulgar that they were advertising a 2 million Rand bottle of whiskey. 2 million Rand bottle of whiskey, 66,666 Rand a tot. However, there are returns to be made in expensive whiskey, and volatile markets may have driven some to drink. But as the Wall Street Journal discovered, for some, the drink itself could be the investment. This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight, I look at intoxicating investments. Joining me, Jason McEvoy, Commercial Director at Norman Goodfellows, and the Whisky Brothers GM, Neil Paterson. They've brought whiskey in for us to sample. So are you going to open it, or am I?
Have you got any Coke?
No, I haven't got Coke, but I've got Diet Pepsi. Because this stuff is awful, isn't it?
It's about 1,800 Rand a tot. And
what is it? Let's go through it. Camera, can you get onto the bottle nice and close? It's a Lalique crystal bottle, which is marvellous. It is the Macallan. Macallan produces a range of whiskies from 10-year-olds all the way up to this one.
All single malt. There's actually the most expensive bottle of single malt ever sold was a Macallan. They call it the Imperial M. It's the same juice as this, but it's in a 6-litre Lalique crystal decanter that took 7 people 50 hours to make, and it sold for $628,000.
Okay, this cheapskate version over here.
This will only set you back 55,000.
No, 55,000 Rand. No, I mean, okay, all jokes aside, that is 55,000 Rands worth of whiskey.
Correct.
55,000 Rand. If I bumped it off the table now and it spilled on the ground, that'd be 55,000 Rand gone.
That's correct.
That is insane.
But if you bought it last year, it would have cost you 30.
Okay, we'll talk about whiskey inflation in just a moment. Bottle of Dalmore Aurora, 45-year-old bottle of Dalmore Aurora. Tell us about that one.
This is a single cask bottling of Dalmore, obviously 45 years old. 8 came into the country. We were lucky enough to get 2 of them. This is the last one left in our store.
Somebody bought that?
Yes, somebody purchased that. That is correct.
But the other one?
Yes, correct.
And that retails at?
About 59,000.
Who buys?
Very wealthy individuals.
Do people buy it to drink?
I think there are people that buy it to drink, definitely. Definitely. People definitely buy it to drink, absolutely. I mean, if I had the money, I'll be honest, I would purchase a bottle. However, my range is probably more about the 500 Rand a bottle single malt range.
Is there, and I mean, you guys can be honest with me, tell me the truth. It's the same thing as if you go and spend, say, 200 Rand on a bottle of wine, you get a very decent bottle of wine. If you spend 300 Rand a bottle of wine, is there a discernible difference? Maybe. You go to 500 from 300, and after that, surely it's much of a muchness. Isn't that with whiskey?
I think it's a little bit more complex than that. Depending on the spirit itself, will depend on how long it can actually sit in a cask for. So a weaker spirit, and I mean, or a lighter spirit, should I say, a Speyside type whiskey, probably shouldn't be in wood for too long. Well, or depending on your taste, of course. If you like a whiskey, a Chardonnay, for example, in wine, if you like a really wooded flavour in whiskey, which I personally don't enjoy, maybe you would enjoy that. But for me, much like wine, there's almost a perfect there's a perfect point at which point the whiskey should be drunk, depending on what cask it's being matured in.
Okay, but from an investment perspective, this was at 38,000 last year.
30,000.
30,000 last year. Retailing at
55 this
55. Year. That's a substantial increase. However, if I bought this from you last year and I then brought it back to you this year, you wouldn't give me 55 for it.
We would broker a sale, so we would take a commission for selling it to someone else.
Okay, but I might make a return, a 50% return.
Correct.
On my investment over 12 months.
I mean, that is a particularly good, that's a great investment for 12 months. And it comes down to a couple of things. One is rarity. 2 is it's a bit of a rand hedge. Obviously, there's an international market here, and when the dollar goes or the rand goes, your whiskey's worth more. If we talk about some other examples, the Glenfiddich 50-year-old.
Glenfiddich 50-year-old is the first time we sort of got into the whiskey porn states. Okay, and I use the term very deliberately because there is a fair amount of vulgarity. But I remember seeing this whiskey, I think first advertised in 2010 at around 100,000 rand a bottle. Or
155.
Yeah, and Norman Goodfellows that year sold at least one.
To that year.
To that year. Who to whom?
We can't tell.
What, you don't remember?
I do. Actually, I remember one of them.
Okay, and his name is? Both male?
Did own a club, did own a nightclub.
Okay,
and you could buy
good.
tots of it in a nightclub.
Excellent. So he bought it for commercial reasons?
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
well that may be sensible.
Yes.
All right, so there was an investment aspect there as well. But so there is, so you will trade whiskey on behalf of people. What are the investability? Because what you brought is a cheapskate bottle of Springbank over here. It's only a 9-year-old, please. But what I notice here, and there's a very detailed label, and it goes through some very specifics about this bottle of Springbank. It's quite peaty whiskey.
It's only about 15 parts per million phenol content, so that for the layman is a lightly peated whiskey.
Okay, if you're delicate, it's
okay. Fair enough.
4 years in full bourbon casks, 5 year in fresh, it looks like ganja barrels. But it was distilled in February 2004, bottled in 2013. But crucially, only 11,000 bottles made, and it's got a strength of nearly 55%.
Correct. It's cask strength.
It's cask strength. Now, does that go towards investability if you're an amateur in this space?
Absolutely. I mean, you definitely want it to be limited in quantity.
I'm going to lie it down so I don't knock it over.
Fair enough. Well, that's a safer option. Yeah, it's definitely, you want it to be limited in quantity. For example, I mean, this is a single cask release. So, that is, probably around 50 casks, obviously mixed together to give you that particular
volume,
whiskey,
yeah.
yes. But a single cask release obviously would up the value as well, especially if the whiskey's good. I think it's important to know, I mean, the whiskey does need to be of a certain quality in the bottle for it to have a cult following. For example, like Port Ellen has a massive cult following. The first edition they released some 10 odd years ago retailed for £150. Now, upwards of the 10th edition, it's going for around £2,000.
It's a bit like collecting stamps, though. You've really got to know what you're doing.
You do.
Because people are prepared to pay millions for that much paper. People are prepared to pay tens of thousands for bottles of this stuff. What are the rules, Jason?
It's about knowing what you're doing a bit of research. The rarity is very important. How many bottles are made? Is it a well-known whiskey house? It must be. If you buy spending real money on whiskey, it must be a single malt. For me, the starting point is a single malt.
So if I can buy a bottle of Bell's and I bring it to you next year and say, please broker a deal on this for me,
you'll lose some money.
You're going to charge me extra for that, I suspect. Okay, so single malts, but not any single malt. 12-year-old single malts are 10 a penny. There's been no massive inflation in that sort of category of single malt.
Without favouring Macallan, Macallan 12 became extinct. So Macallan 12 Sherrywood and Macallan 18 Sherrywood are extinct. So now there's Macallan, Sienna, Ruby, and
But those 12-year-olds now are collectible
Correct.
because of the labels.
Correct, and they're extinct. And
Yeah.
the whiskey inside's great, and whiskies age well. So you can keep a whiskey like that easily for 10 years, and it's going to taste exactly the same because it's got a high alcohol content, but stores very well. So
But there's no maturation that happens in the bottle,
no,
is there?
No.
I mean, the maturation happens in the barrel. It's bottled.
Correct.
It then is. It's not like wine, which is a living organism and continues to either improve or deteriorate.
There is a bit of science behind incredibly old bottles. So I mean, 10 years, 20 years, you might not notice anything. There has been a little bit of scientific work done on bottles that are 60, 70 years old, where you pick up an 8-year-old Ardbeg or 10-year-old Ardbeg, for example, and it's 60 years old. A guy opens it, obviously a wealthy individual, because you're probably looking at about 15,000 Rand again for the bottle, where the standard release is around 550 Rand. Obviously try the two against one another, and 100% of the time the guy's going to say, all right, the one from 1960 tastes a whole lot better. Perhaps that's him justifying to himself
that
it was worth the extra 14,000 Rand. But yeah.
Normal Goodfellows, big store, big range. And you have people who organise their parties, you'll do home deliveries, all of that sort of stuff. Whiskey is a nice sort of cream on the top of that business.
It's a very much a growing category. I mean, if you go back 5 years, the amount of the whiskey range has probably doubled in 5 years, something like that, with a great interest in single malts. And I mean, in terms of South Africa as a whiskey drinking nation, we rank 5th, I think it is.
Yeah, something crazy.
Which is amazing for our per capita, how many people we've got in the country.
Have you seen how much Coca-Cola we sell? Because people go, an appetizer. It's fantastic. Ship us an appetizer. Yum. But you guys operate now a fairly small, store in one of the most expensive rental spaces in Johannesburg, in Hyde Park Shopping Centre.
Norman Goodfellows were in the shop before
They were.
us.
They pulled out very
expensive
pages. Absolutely, the rent was too high. But you can sustain a business.
Yes, I mean,
on
you
top-end
can.
whiskies.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a massive market for it, and I think it's important that obviously you know what you're talking about, of course, so you can actually add value to the customer when they come in the door. They can tell you what they've drunk, and you can obviously suggest something that's obviously similar to the liking of their palate. And I think that's key. And service delivery. I mean, we obviously pride ourselves on just customer centric. We look after the customer.
Do you recommend I insure a bottle like this before I take it out the shop?
Yes, I would. Obviously, it depends on your bank balance, Bruce. I would imagine you're relatively well off, but
no, I'm so well off. I'll take both. Actually.
Excellent, good.
But that's the thing. I mean, you've got to be really careful before you go in. It's not you're not going with the shopping trolley and going through and going, I'll take some J&B and I'll take some Bells because the Joneses
we offer all these
over.
things, but yeah.
Exactly. Okay, give me a perspective. I go in and I buy this today. I then wrap it in a silk cloth and I hide it away from my children's dangerous hands, and I store it under the stairs somewhere for 5 years. What is your projection that I might be able to sell this for in 5 years' time? Considering that it's now at 55, might it get to 100 in 5 years?
I think that's possible. That would be probably roughly a 20% per annum increase. I think that's quite possible. It is not a hugely liquid market, so
it's entirely liquid.
Excuse the fun there. It's about willing buyer, willing seller.
Yeah, but of course.
So quite different to a share, which you can trade on the stock exchange. But I think certainly, if you keep that 5 years, I think there's a good chance you get into 100,000 rand mark.
The Aurora?
Similar type of increases, definitely.
It all depends on what happens to the currency.
Yes,
it all depends on the
Correct.
collectability, the scarcity.
Correct.
So, would either of you, were you recommending I go to Macro and take out 3 mortgages on my house, sell my children into slavery, and sell my cars and my shoes off my feet?
Interesting question.
Is there investability at that level of 2 million rand a bottle for Chivas Regal Royal Salute?
Is, but just to give you some background on it, okay, that whiskey's actually been around for 3 years, all right? So it's not that new to the world market, okay? The initial cost of it overseas, again, the States, the UK was £150,000, okay? There is a bottle online right now at a particular English whiskey site selling it for £150,000. So arbitrage, you could technically go to Macro right now, whip out your credit card, and essentially open up your own whiskey store, Bruce's whiskey store, and undercut them by what's it, £50,000,
and still make a profit.
And still make a profit, yeah. So
I'm learning all about whiskey. It's not to be drunk, it's to be stored, kept, and sold to some other sucker later on. Jason McEvoy, Commercial Director at Norman Goodfellows, and the Whisky Brothers General Manager Neil Paterson. Thanks both of you for coming in. Please don't drop them on the way out. Maybe they should. Maybe lick it off the floor. Thank you for watching. There'll be more tonight, tomorrow. Till then, good night and goodbye.